Ever watched an old cartoon and thought, wait, this wasn't meant for kids, was it? The 1960s and 70s were when animation lost its innocence. Bright colors hid rebellion, madness, and meaning few understood. These weren't Saturday morning shows, they were experiments disguised as fun. Behind every smiling character was a message too bold for its time. Stay with me, because once you see what these animators were really doing, you'll never look at cartoons the same way again. Number 15, Watership Down, 1978. It looked like a simple story about rabbits. It wasn't. Watership Down tricked millions into thinking they were in for a peaceful countryside adventure, fluffy heroes, green meadows, soft music. Then came the nightmares. The film's serene start turned into one of the most emotionally brutal journeys ever animated. Rabbits clawed, fought, and bled, in ways no one expected from a cartoon. Parents stormed theaters demanding refunds. Children left crying, unsure why their cute animal story turned into a tragedy about power, survival, and fear. Director Martin Rosen based the film on Richard Adams's best-selling novel, but the studio marketed it as family-friendly. Big mistake. Behind the hand-painted frames was a political allegory about oppression, leadership, and the cost of freedom. Every rabbit colony represented a different form of government democracy, dictatorship, or chaos. Even the villain General Woundwort wasn't evil for the sake of it. He was a leader corrupted by fear. What made it unforgettable was its emotional honesty. The violence wasn't for shock, it was a metaphor for the struggle to stay free in a world that punishes the weak. Viewers in 1978 had never seen animation this raw or sincere. Some still call it the most traumatizing cartoon ever made. But under the horror beats a strange beauty proof that animation could feel as human and as heartbreaking as any live-action film. Number 14, Wizards, 1977. Imagine a fairy tale that smashes headfirst into a post-apocalyptic wasteland that's wizards. Ralph Bakshi, the wild mind behind Fritz the Cat, created a fantasy where magic and technology fight for the ruins of the earth. On the surface, it looked like another sword and sorcery adventure. Beneath that, a cold reflection on humanity's obsession with destruction. The movie's two main wizards, Avatar and Black Wolf, represented opposite philosophies. One believed in peace and imagination, the other in fear and propaganda. And yes, Bakshi actually used real archival war footage, rotoscoped into animated battle scenes, to drive his point home. For audiences expecting elves and unicorns, that was a jarring wake-up call. Wizards looked hand-drawn and hopeful, but carried an undercurrent of despair. Its message was blunt. Even in a fantasy world, humanity's worst habits don't die, they just change shape. The contrast between goofy, comedy, and dark realism made the movie feel unstable, like a dream teetering on the edge of a nightmare. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Some called it brilliant, others called it insane. But what's undeniable is that Wizards was decades ahead of its time, a psychedelic anti-war fable disguised as a cartoon for dreamers. Watch it today, and you'll see reflections of every conflict that still defines the real world. Number 13, Once Upon a Girl, 1976. You think you know fairy tales? Think again. Once Upon a Girl began as a courtroom comedy with Mother Goose on trial for corrupting classic bedtime stories. What followed was a parade of twisted retellings that turned the sweetness of childhood folklore upside down. The art looked suspiciously polished, because many of its animators had worked at big-name studios before deciding to rebel. They poured their frustration into a film that mocked the idea that cartoons should always be pure. Each story within it, from Little Red Riding Hood to Cinderella, became a dark mirror. The familiar characters we grew up with were suddenly flawed, confused, and very human. The humor was edgy, but intentionally self-aware. It wasn't there to shock, it was there to question why we hide the messy parts of human behavior behind glossy animation. The result was chaos. Critics didn't know whether to laugh or look away. Some called it tasteless, others praised its boldness. Either way, it proved one thing. The line between innocent and inappropriate is paper thin when artists are set free. Once Upon a Girl is still hard to find, but its legend survives as one of the strangest animated experiments of the decade, a film that dared to ask what would happen if bedtime stories finally told the truth. Number 12, Allegro Non Troppo, 1976. If you've ever seen Fantasia, imagine its European twin, only darker, funnier, and infinitely weirder. Allegro Non Troppo, created by Italian animator Bruno Bozzetto, used the same concept. Classical music set to animation. But instead of dancing hippos and cheerful colors, it offered surreal stories about loneliness, vanity, and the absurdity of human existence. Each musical segment told its own bizarre tale, a man evolving from an ape only to destroy his world, a lonely cat haunted by memories of lost affection, a bottle that dreams of freedom but ends up trapped again. It was heartbreaking and hilarious in the same breath. The live-action scenes between the cartoons mocked the very idea of art as serious business directors shouting musicians, panicking chaos everywhere. What made Allegro Non Troppo so unforgettable was its balance of beauty and cynicism. The animation was fluid, the music divine, yet the message was quietly devastating. For all our intelligence, humans repeat the same mistakes endlessly. Audiences expecting a comforting visual symphony were blindsided by existential dread wrapped in classical charm. Even today, it's a masterclass in creative rebellion, an animated poem that makes you laugh, then suddenly question your own place in the universe. Number 11. Tarzoon, Shame of the Jungle, 1975. It was meant to parody adventure films and ended up becoming one of the strangest cartoons ever made. Tarzoon, Shame of the Jungle, reimagined the famous jungle hero as a clueless wanderer in a wild world that looked familiar but felt wrong. This French-Belgian production used outrageous designs, awkward humor, and bizarre logic to tear apart the myth of the perfect hero. When it crossed into English-speaking markets, the absurdity multiplied, thanks to voice performances from comedians like John Belushi and Bill Murray. Hearing those familiar voices inside a movie that looked like it had escaped from someone's fever dream made the experience even stranger. The film took the classic explorer story and turned it inside out. The jungle wasn't majestic, it was ridiculous. The animals weren't friendly, they were deranged caricatures of human behavior. Every scene felt like a joke, told too long, looping back into madness. It was messy, loud, and unapologetically weird, but that's what made it memorable. Tarzoon wasn't trying to be art. It was a dare proof that even the most iconic character could be reimagined as a fool. Critics didn't know whether to laugh or run, but for those who loved animation that mocked its own rules, Shame of the Jungle was the wildest ride of the decade. Number 10. Down and Dirty Duck, 1974. If Fritz the Cat was a revolution, Down and Dirty Duck was its unruly cousin who never got invited to family gatherings. Released under Roger Corman's New World Pictures banner, this underground animated comedy pushed absurdity to new heights. It looked like something drawn on the back of a napkin during a wild weekend, and that's part of its charm. The story followed a mild-mannered insurance clerk named Willard and his talking duck companion. Together, they stumbled through surreal vignettes filled with exaggerated jokes, strange creatures, and biting satire about urban life. Nothing made sense, and that was the point. Down and Dirty Duck wasn't designed to comfort anyone. It mocked everything office culture, romantic cliches, and the very idea of storytelling itself. The animation was crude intentionally so. Characters bent and twisted in impossible ways. The humor felt random, even reckless. Yet, hidden beneath the chaos was a sharp commentary on the emptiness of modern living. While mainstream studios played it safe, this film reveled in its weirdness. Critics were divided. Some dismissed it as nonsense, others saw it as outsider art at its rawest. Decades later, it found cult status among animation historians who recognized its significance. A time capsule of early 70s counterculture expressed through pure creative anarchy. It may not have been beautiful, but it was fearless. Down and Dirty Duck proved that sometimes the ugliest cartoons speak the loudest truths. Number 9. The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat, 1974. When Ralph Bakshi walked away from the first Fritz the Cat, the studio decided to make a sequel without him. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. And that's exactly what made it fascinating. The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat ditched its creator's vision and went completely off the rails. The film was structured as a series of disconnected fantasies, each representing one of Fritz's metaphorical lives. One minute he's in outer space, the next, he's in a war zone, Then he's in a twisted version of suburbia. Each world reflected a different slice of human absurdity. What made it so strange was how self-aware it became. Fritz was no longer the confident anti-hero. He was a tired wanderer trapped in a cycle of bad decisions and surreal nightmares. The movie felt like a bad dream, drawn by someone who'd seen too much of the real world. The animation ranged from experimental to intentionally rough, as if each scene was designed by a different artist. Critics panned it for lacking purpose, but fans of underground animation appreciated its madness. It wasn't polished like Disney or smart like Bakshi's first film. It was pure chaos, proudly unfiltered. In hindsight, The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat became a symbol of artistic burnout. It showed how quickly a counterculture movement could lose its spark when imitation replaced inspiration. Still, for those who love weird cinema, it's an unforgettable mess, strange, disjointed, and impossible to look away from. Number 8. Belladonna of Sadness, 1973. This isn't just a movie, it's a painting that breathes. Belladonna of Sadness is one of the most visually stunning and emotionally haunting animated films ever made. Produced in Japan by Mushi Production, the same studio behind Astro Boy, it marked the final and most daring chapter of Osamu Tezuka's adult-oriented trilogy. The film tells the tragic story of a young woman betrayed by society and transformed by her pain into something powerful and otherworldly. Every frame looks like watercolor art come to life, elegant, hypnotic, and often disturbing in its emotional intensity. What made Belladonna so remarkable wasn't just its style, it was its tone. The movie doesn't rush. It moves like a slow, fevered dream, drifting between beauty and anguish. The animation flows seamlessly from delicate sketches to surreal, hallucinatory visions that feel more like visual poetry than narrative film. When it was released, audiences didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't a conventional story. It was an experience. Too artistic for mainstream crowds and too intense for casual viewers, it vanished for decades before finally being rediscovered and restored in the 21st century. Now hailed as a masterpiece of avant-garde, animation Belladonna of Sadness remains unforgettable. It's the kind of film that lingers in your mind long after the credits roll, not because it shocks, but because it dares to express raw emotion through art. It's haunting, hypnotic, and completely unlike anything else from its era. Number 7. Fantastic Planet, 1973. Imagine watching a dream drawn by someone who doesn't quite remember what humans are. That's Fantastic Planet, a French-Czech animated masterpiece from René Laloux, a film that feels less like science fiction and more like an alien documentary about us. Set on the distant planet Egom, tiny humans called alms live as pets under the rule of towering blue aliens known as drogs. The imagery is surreal, humans herded like animals, meditating aliens floating in trance, and landscapes that pulse like living organisms. Every movement, every sound feels just slightly wrong intentionally. Underneath its otherworldly surface, Fantastic Planet is a chilling allegory about control and freedom. It mirrors real-world systems of oppression, asking what happens when empathy disappears. The paper-cutout animation gives everything an eerie stillness, as though the film itself is trapped in slow motion. When it premiered, viewers were mesmerized and disturbed in equal measure. Some called it an acid trip of a movie. Others saw it as quiet political genius. Its haunting soundtrack and hand-drawn strangeness gave it a timeless feel, distant yet deeply human. Fantastic Planet doesn't shout its message. It whispers it through discomfort. It teaches that alien worlds don't need to be galaxies away. They can exist right here in our own reflection. Even decades later, it's still one of the most haunting visions ever committed to animation. Number 6. Heavy Traffic, 1973. Ralph Bakshi never played by the rules, and Heavy Traffic was proof. After the controversy of Fritz the Cat, he went darker, grittier, and more personal. The result was a feverish portrait of New York City that felt like part dream, part documentary. The film followed an underground cartoonist navigating life amid chaos, crime, poverty, and lost hope. But it wasn't the story that made Heavy Traffic so shocking. It was how it looked and felt. Bakshi mixed live-action footage with hand-drawn animation, blurring the line between reality and imagination. Streets were grimy, people were exaggerated, and every frame dripped with urban decay. It was both hilarious and heartbreaking, a portrait of survival in a city where innocence had long since packed its bags. Critics were divided once again. Some saw brilliance, others saw madness, but no one could deny the energy. Heavy traffic throbbed with the pulse of early 1970s America, its frustrations, its humor, and its disillusionment. Bakshi's willingness to merge cartoon fantasy with real human struggle made it revolutionary. He treated animation not as escapism, but as confrontation, a mirror held up to a society falling apart. Heavy traffic proved that adult cartoons didn't need to be about shock. They could be about truth, messy, uncomfortable, and heartbreakingly real. Number 5. Fritz the Cat, 1972. Before the world had adult animation, it had Fritz the Cat. Ralph Bakshi's groundbreaking film exploded onto screens in 1972 and instantly divided audiences. Based on Robert Crumb's underground comic, it followed a restless cat drifting through city chaos, chasing thrills and questioning everything around him. The animation was colorful, the world full of life, yet its message was pitch black. The counterculture dream had already started to rot. Fritz the Cat made history as the first cartoon ever to earn an X rating, but that wasn't its real legacy. Its power came from attitude, a raw, unapologetic look at a generation losing its idealism. Fritz wasn't a hero, he was a symbol of confusion. Every scene felt improvised, pulsing with the energy of early 70s rebellion. Bakshi used scratchy street-level art to mirror the chaos of urban life. Jazz clubs, protests, and absurd encounters blended together into one surreal portrait of America at its breaking point. It wasn't beautiful, but it was honest, too honest for comfort. Critics called it everything from genius to garbage, but no one could ignore it. Fritz the Cat proved that animation could grow up, and maybe that was the scariest part. It broke the illusion that cartoons were safe spaces, showing that the medium could explore the same turmoil, cynicism, and contradictions as real life. Number 4. 1001 Nights, 1969. Long before fantasy epics filled movie theaters, Japan gave us 1001 Nights, the first part of Osamu Tezuka's daring experiment in mature storytelling. It looked like a lush retelling of classic folklore, Aladdin, Sinbad, and Scheherazade, but under the dazzling colors was a complex exploration of desire, ambition, and consequence. The film's visuals were breathtaking. Geometric cities, swirling deserts, and kaleidoscopic transitions that felt like dream logic. Tezuka and his co-director, Eiichi Yamamoto, treated every frame like a painting. It moved with the rhythm of a poem, soft, fluid, yet constantly transforming. When released, audiences were stunned. Some admired its artistry, others didn't know what to make of its surreal tone. It mixed history, fantasy, and psychology into something that defied categorization. The film's message was simple but powerful. No matter how far we chase illusions of pleasure or glory, the human heart remains restless. Decades later, 1001 Nights is seen as the spark that ignited Japan's movement toward more thoughtful adult animation. It showed that cartoons could tell grand, complicated stories, and that imagination could also be a mirror reflecting our deepest contradictions. Number 3. Cleopatra, 1970. From the creator of Astro Boy came a shock no one expected. Cleopatra, the second entry in Osamu Tezuka's trilogy, took one of history's most famous queens and turned her story into a psychedelic odyssey of power, loyalty, and obsession. Audiences went in expecting a history lesson. What they got felt like a fever dream, projected through stained glass. The animation style constantly changed, one moment epic and painterly, the next absurd and cartoonish. Tezuka blended science fiction, time travel, and ancient politics into something that defied all logic, yet somehow made emotional sense. Behind the dazzling imagery was a sobering reflection on how beauty and influence are manipulated across ages. Cleopatra wasn't portrayed as a mythic goddess or a villain. She was a human being struggling to survive in a world ruled by deceit and ego. When it premiered, critics didn't know what to say. Was it satire? Was it tragedy? It was both, and that's why it endured. Cleopatra captured the energy of an era obsessed with reinvention. It wasn't perfect, but it dared to mix myth art and commentary into one sprawling, hypnotic vision. Even now, it feels ahead of its time, a film that invites fascination and confusion in equal measure. Number 2. Yellow Submarine, 1968. Few films have ever looked as cheerful, yet felt as strange as Yellow Submarine. On the surface, it's a musical adventure starring the Beatles saving Pepperland from the Blue Meanies. Beneath the bright colors, it's a journey through the collective consciousness of the 1960s, a cartoon symphony about hope, fear, and the mind itself. The film's psychedelic art direction was revolutionary. Nothing moved the way it was supposed to. Backgrounds melted, shapes breathed, and sound became part of the design. For many viewers, it was their first introduction to surrealism disguised as pop culture. Children saw a lighthearted fantasy. Adults saw something much deeper, a coded story about freedom, triumphing over control, imagination, conquering conformity. Its strange rhythm mirrored the decade's energy, a generation breaking boundaries visually and musically. Yellow Submarine wasn't just an animated film, it was a cultural event. Its influence stretched far beyond the screen into album covers, advertising, and art schools. And while its style has been copied endlessly, nothing matches the purity of its original weirdness. It's cheerful on the outside, cosmic on the inside, a cartoon that taught millions how to dream in color. Number 1. Western Soda, 1965. You might have missed it, but animation historians never did. Italy's Western Soda, directed by Bruno Bozzetto, looked like a playful spoof of cowboy adventures. Instead, it became one of the earliest examples of animation made for grown-ups without saying so out loud. The visuals were deceptively simple, bright colors, quirky movements, and slapstick timing. Yet every joke carried a bite. The film parodied every Hollywood Western cliché: the duel, the damsel, the dusty town with crooked sheriffs. But behind the laughs was a strange melancholy, a sense that the heroic myths of cinema were hollow. What made it weirder was its rhythm. Scenes dragged on, deliberately emphasizing awkward silence instead of punchlines. Gunfights were replaced with absurd chases. Romance turned into confusion. Viewers expecting an upbeat parody walked out unsettled, unsure why they felt uneasy watching something so colorful. Bozzetto's genius was in tone, crafting humor that hid quiet sadness. Western Soda asked if the cowboy legend was ever noble, or just a fantasy we used to feel brave. Critics at the time didn't know what to call it, but later generations recognized it as the first European animated satire aimed squarely at adults. Beneath its cartoon skin lived a sharp social commentary, making it a perfect closing chapter for this era of misunderstood animation. So, which one of these strange creations confused you the most? The 1960s and 70s proved that animation was never just for children. It was a playground for rebellion, satire, and artistic courage. Every frame hid a message, every smile masked a warning. If these films taught us anything, it's that weirdness often tells the truth first. Which of these will you dare to re-watch now that you finally understand what they were really saying?